The day we buried my daughter, her husband stood at her graveside with dry eyes and a phone in his pocket that kept buzzing. I told myself he was in shock. I told myself grief looks different on different people. I told myself a lot of things that week. But 2 days after we laid my baby girl in the ground, he listed her car for sale on Facebook Marketplace, and that was just the beginning.
My name is Carol. I'm 57 years old, and I live in a small town in central Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows your family name, your business, and exactly which pew you sit in at church on Sunday. I raised 2 kids mostly on my own after my husband Richard passed from a heart attack back in 2009. My son Danny moved out west after college, settled in Portland, doing well for himself. But my daughter Melissa, she stayed close. She bought a house 12 minutes from mine, and we talked every single day. Sometimes twice. Melissa was 31 years old when she died. Ovarian cancer. Stage 4, diagnosed in January, gone by October. 9 months. 9 months is all we got from the diagnosis to the funeral, and I would give everything I have left on this earth to get just one of those months back. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, who brought soup to sick neighbors she barely knew, who laughed with her whole body and cried at dog food commercials. She had this way of walking into a room and making it feel warmer just by being in it. She met Marcus at a company holiday party when she was 26. He was charming, well-dressed, good at saying all the right things. He worked in sales, which, in hindsight, tells you everything you need to know about the man. He could sell water to a fish. He could sell grief to a grieving mother. They got married in 2019, outdoor ceremony, sunflowers everywhere because that was Melissa's favorite flower. I danced with her that night and I whispered in her ear, "I hope he spends the rest of his life trying to deserve you." I meant it as a blessing. I didn't know it would end up being a prophecy. When Melissa got her diagnosis, Marcus was present. I'll give him that. He drove her to appointments, sat in the waiting rooms, posted updates on Facebook that hundreds of people reacted to with little heart emojis. But I was there too. I was there more. And the more time I spent in that house, the more small things started to itch at the back of my mind. The first thing I noticed was the phone. Marcus always had his phone face down. Always. The moment he set it on any surface, the kitchen counter, the coffee table, the arm of the hospital waiting room chair, it went face down. Now, plenty of people do that. It doesn't mean anything on its own. But I'm a mother. I notice things. The second thing I noticed was that whenever I arrived at their house unexpectedly, there was a shift in the air. Marcus would tense up. He'd become overly friendly in that way that people do when they're compensating for something. He'd offer me coffee 3 times in 5 minutes and ask me questions about myself that he'd never shown interest in before. "How's your garden doing, Carol? You still growing tomatoes?" He never cared about my tomatoes before my daughter got cancer. The third thing, and this one I pushed down for a long time because I didn't want to believe it, was the way Melissa looked at him sometimes when she thought nobody was watching. It wasn't love I saw in her eyes. It was something quieter than that. Something sadder. Once, about 4 months before she passed, I was helping her fold laundry in the bedroom while Marcus was out. She was having a decent day, energy-wise, and we were laughing about something silly. And then out of nowhere, she went quiet. She held one of his shirts in her hands and just stared at it. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked. She looked up at me and smiled that smile, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said, "I just want to make sure you're going to be okay, Mom. After everything." I thought she was talking about her illness. About losing her. I was only half right. But what happened 2 weeks before she passed changed everything. I just didn't understand it yet. Melissa died on a Thursday morning in October, with me on one side of her bed and Marcus on the other. I held her hand. I told her I loved her. I told her she was the best thing I ever did with my life. Marcus sat in his chair and looked at the wall. I told myself he was shutting down. I told myself some people go somewhere else in their minds when they can't handle reality. I was so consumed by my own devastation that I gave him every benefit of every doubt. The funeral was 4 days later. Marcus wore a nice suit. He accepted condolences gracefully. He said the right words to the right people. He was good at it. Remember, this man was in sales. But he did not cry. Not once. Not a single tear at the church, not at the graveside, not even when Melissa's best friend from college got up and talked about the time Melissa drove 6 hours in a snowstorm just to be with her after a bad breakup. Everyone else in that room was destroyed. My son Danny flew in from Portland and sobbed so hard he had to step outside twice. Melissa's coworkers were a mess. Her childhood best friend Diane could barely stand up. Marcus stood there looking like a man waiting for a meeting to end. I noticed. I filed it away. 2 days after the funeral, my neighbor Linda called me. She's a sweet woman, Linda, retired teacher, spends too much time on Facebook, and I have never been more grateful for that habit in my life. Carol, she said, and her voice had that careful, walking on eggshells tone that immediately made my stomach drop. I don't know if I should tell you this, but I think you'd want to know. She had seen a listing on Facebook Marketplace. Melissa's car. A 2021 Honda CR-V in pearl white that Melissa had saved up for and picked out herself and loved. Listed for sale. By Marcus. 2 days. 2 days after we buried her. I sat down on my kitchen floor, which is not something I'm prone to doing, and I just sat there with the phone against my ear for a long moment. Carol? You still there? I'm here, I said. Send me the link. Now, I want to be fair. People do have to deal with practical matters after a death. Cars, finances, belongings, those things don't wait for you to finish grieving. I know that. I told myself that. But something about the speed of it, 2 days, combined with everything else I'd been quietly filing away for months. I couldn't let it go. So I started asking questions. I called Melissa's closest friend, a woman named Priya who had been by her side through the entire illness. I'd always liked Priya, but we'd never been especially close. Now I called her and I asked her, as gently as I could, if there was anything she thought I should know. There was a long silence on the phone. And then Priya said, I promised Melissa I wouldn't say anything while she was alive. She made me swear. The whole world got very still. But she didn't say anything about after. What Priya told me in the next 45 minutes rearranged everything I thought I knew. Marcus had been seeing someone else. Not a recent thing, not a weak moment, a full, ongoing relationship with a woman named Brittany who lived 2 towns over. It had been going on for over a year. Priya had found out by accident, 6 weeks into Melissa's diagnosis, when she borrowed Melissa's laptop to look something up and a message notification appeared on the screen. Melissa had known. She had known for months that her husband was having an affair. She had known while she was going to chemotherapy. She had known while she was losing her hair and her strength and her sense of taste from the treatments. She had known, and she had said nothing, not to me, not to Danny, not to anyone except Priya, because she didn't want her final months to be consumed by drama and legal battles and our family's anger. She protected us. Even then. Even while she was dying. When Priya told me that, I had to put the phone down and just breathe for a few minutes. Because the grief I felt in that moment wasn't just the grief of losing my daughter anymore. It was the grief of knowing what she had carried alone. It was rage. It was a guilt that I still haven't fully let go of, the guilt of not knowing, of not seeing it, of not being able to take that weight from her. My daughter spent the last year of her life being betrayed by the man who was supposed to love her most. And she bore it silently to protect the people she loved. That is the most heartbreaking and the most heroic thing I have ever heard in my life. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. I alternated between grief so deep it felt like drowning, and a rage so cold it almost felt like calm. I'd lie in bed and think about Marcus sitting at Melissa's bedside with his phone face down, while she was sleeping. Texting Brittany maybe? Making plans? Counting down. I thought about the Facebook posts he'd made during her illness, the ones that got hundreds of heart emojis, where he called her his, warrior, and his whole world. People had commented things like, "You're such a devoted husband," and "She's so lucky to have you." The performance of it made me physically sick. Danny was the first person I told. He answered on the second ring, heard my voice, and said, "Mom, what happened?" Because he knows my voice the way only your children know your voice. I told him everything. He was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said very quietly, "What do we do?" And I realized I'd been asking myself the same question for 3 days. Here's the thing about grief that nobody tells you. It can either hollow you out completely, or it can, at some point, turn into something with an edge to it. Something that moves forward instead of just falling down. I chose to move forward. The first thing I did was contact a lawyer. Because Melissa had a will, she'd made one when the diagnosis came, methodical and practical like she was about everything, and in that will, she had left certain personal items specifically to me, Danny, and her friends. Her jewelry. Some furniture. Photographs. Things that mattered. Marcus, within 2 weeks of her death, had already begun moving those items around. Some things had been relocated. Some things were missing. I won't detail the legal specifics, but I will tell you that having documentation, photos Melissa had sent me over the years of her home, texts where she'd mentioned specific items, made a significant difference. The second thing I did was talk to Priya again, and asked her if she'd be willing to put in writing what she knew. She didn't hesitate. She said Melissa had actually left a letter with her, a letter for me, to be given to me after she was gone. I don't know if I can fully describe what it was like to read my daughter's handwriting again 3 weeks after her funeral. The letter wasn't long. But in it, Melissa explained that she knew about Brittany. She said she had chosen not to fight because she didn't have the energy, and she wanted whatever time she had left to be about love, not war. And then she wrote something that I read probably 50 times in the days that followed. She wrote, "Don't waste your grief on him, Mom. But don't let him walk away from what he did either. I didn't have the strength left. You do." My daughter handed me the torch. I was not going to drop it. I want to be clear about something. I didn't set out to destroy Marcus. I'm not a vindictive woman. What I wanted was for the truth to exist in the world, for the performance he put on to be seen for what it was, especially by the people who had praised him for it. The Facebook posts were the place I started. Marcus had left all of Melissa's illness updates on his public profile. All those devoted husband posts, all those heart emoji tributes. I began sharing them alongside what I knew, carefully, factually, without exaggeration. I shared Priya's account. I shared the timeline of the affair. People who had commented, "You're such a devoted husband," began deleting their comments in real time. Mutual friends started reaching out to me, stunned. And then something I hadn't anticipated happened. Another woman contacted me. It turned out Brittany was not the first. A woman named Gina reached out through a mutual friend. She had dated Marcus for 2 years before Melissa, and she told me a story I recognized: the charm, the performance, the face-down phone. She'd found out about cheating then too, had said nothing publicly because she'd felt embarrassed, and had watched him walk down the aisle with Melissa feeling like she should have spoken up. She spoke up now. As for the car, the one he'd listed for sale 2 days after the funeral, it turned out Melissa's name was still on the title as a co-owner, and there was a question about whether he had the legal right to sell it without going through the estate first. My lawyer sent a letter. The listing came down. Marcus tried to call me once during all of this. I let it go to voicemail. He said he was devastated by my campaign against him, and that I was dragging Melissa's memory through the mud. I thought about calling him back and explaining, very calmly, that the mud was already there. He put it there. I was just turning on the lights. I didn't call him back. There was nothing he could say that I needed to hear. His reputation in our town, the one he had worked so carefully to cultivate, the devoted husband, the admirable man who had stood by his sick wife, was gone. It didn't come back. He moved to a different city a few months later. I heard through the grapevine that things with Brittany hadn't worked out. I can't say I was surprised. I still talk to Melissa every day. I know how that sounds. But I do. I stand in my garden where I grow her sunflowers every summer, because somebody has to, and I tell her about my day. I tell her about Danny, who calls me more than he used to. I tell her about Priya, who has become one of my closest friends, which is a gift that came wrapped in the most awful circumstances imaginable. I keep her letter in my nightstand. I have read it, at this point, more times than I can count. I think about what she wrote. Don't waste your grief on him. I think about it whenever I feel the anger come back up, which it does, even now. And I use it like a compass. It tells me which direction to go. The grief hasn't gotten smaller. I don't think it ever truly does when you lose a child. It just gets roomier somehow. You learn to live alongside it, to carry it without it crushing you. What I know for certain is this: Melissa saw clearly. She saw Marcus for what he was, and she made a choice not to spend her remaining time in a battle she couldn't win. That was her strength, not her weakness. She chose love over war, and she trusted me to handle the rest. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that trust. If you're watching this and you're carrying something heavy, some truth you're afraid to name, some wrong you think will never be righted, I want you to know something. The truth has a way of surviving. It outlasts the people who tried to bury it. It outlasts the performances and the Facebook posts and the dry eyes at the graveside. It outlasted Marcus. It will outlast whatever is sitting on your chest tonight too. My daughter knew that. Even at the very end, especially at the very end, she knew that. And she made sure I did too. To Melissa. The sunflowers are blooming. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for more real stories about strength, betrayal, and the people who rise from both.